When I speak with folks who are at the beginning of developing a building project, a lot of the times questions around sort of what the break even number might be, as in how much is it going to cost to get this thing going? Because you have to balance that number against what you want to do from a revenue point of view, from a business model point of view. But the thing is, it's not just a number that you can put out there sort of generically, because it has everything to do with adding up all of the different startup costs that you're going to have. So, for instance, things like your lease, things like your actual build out cost, things like the capital improvements you're going to need to make to the building, as well as whatever you're going to put into the building. It's a very complicated equation because it's unique to every project. It's unique to you, meaning it's unique to your vision for your building. So we have to combine all these different things so that we have a true understanding of what your initial build out cost is. And that's really what developing a project is all about, is trying to isolate and sort of understand all these different steps along the way, developing your idea, finding a space, figuring out how much all these different things cost so that we can know what budget we're even working in. Like, what are we trying to design for a layout? That has to be sort of bounced against something real. Otherwise, you might end up with drawings that are very nice, but not at all what you can afford, or a building that needs too much work that really puts you behind the eight ball before you even open. So, this has everything to do with helping you, even in terms of guiding your real estate selection and everything down the line. So, we're going to talk about that a little bit today. So, early on in projects, what's really important is understanding how much money is necessary to invest, and then how much money is actually coming out on the other side. So, what's the relationship between your initial investment and your business model expectations, realizing that that's just an estimate. And so we know there are certain things, like we know that there are specialty items that you need to invest in, whether it's climbing walls or skate park or equipment or recording studios or whatever it is for your unique business. There's a certain amount of that. And that's something that we can generally get pricing on a square foot basis, on a cost per item basis, whatever it is. And that's pretty definable. And so, that's something that I would say we can define pretty easily. But what ends up happening is that depending on the business, or the building, I should say, that you're walking into, the question is, are you investing this much, or are you investing this much? And what I mean by that is, like, where is your money going? So are you having to invest a lot of money in the building itself just because it's in really, really bad shape? Or are you investing just a little bit there? Or are you having to invest a lot to, do air conditioning or whatever it is, or other mechanical systems? Like, are you having to put in a bunch of locker rooms? Like, all of these things start to add up very quickly. And so the number that people often think about is kind of like this smaller number. But in reality, the bigger number is actually really critical to be thinking about, because all of these different things come into play and they all end up influencing what your total number is, meaning this sort of bigger number, because that's the number that you're going to have to balance against your business model and your revenue expectations. So the question to me often is, how do you manage this stuff? And there are ways we can manage this as well, because, you know, people are building their own things sometimes. Like, there are ways to lower this expense. There absolutely are. So that's one thing. But beyond that, the way that we really need to be careful with this is, like, how do we manage these expenses, like these big chunks that show up, whether it's, again, air conditioning or painting or whatever it is that, like, or even worse, something that you shouldn't take on at all, like the building looks like it might fall down, because that actually is the kind of thing that's like a red flag that can just explode your budget to the point where, like, you actually may never open if that thing blows up in your face. And so we have to be careful about all these things. These are the uncertain moments, and these are the uncertain things that we have to sort of look at. But it also helps you when you're looking at real estate. So, for instance, if your business model is at a certain point and you're seeing that, you have to just put in too much for air conditioning, and too much for this and too much for that, that helps you understand what type of building you can even afford, or what kind of condition it is in. So, for instance, you might not have enough money to do capital improvements. You might have to get something where these costs are very low, meaning you can keep this in check, so that you can actually, come out to a point where it's manageable. Sometimes we actually do need to make this investment and we have to be okay with it. It's not that it's the wrong thing to do, it's that you have to be okay with it and it has to work relative to your business model as well. So, again, these are all the different things that we're balancing, and these are the type of uncertainties that as you're going through the project, this is what we're talking about when we're looking at a building. This is what we're talking about when you're thinking about the work or the investment that you might need to do to it. Sometimes it's on like a square foot basis, meaning we can just apply a square foot value to it. And sometimes it's more of a specific thing, like we know air conditioning and we can kind of leave the rest of it alone, or whatever the case is. So there's different ways of doing it where we can basically add it all up, meaning we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, like air conditioning and locker rooms or whatever. And then there's sometimes where we know that just based on the square footage, we can multiply that by a certain dollar amount to get a ballpark number. And so there's not a right or a wrong way to do it. But what's important is that you're sort of aware of the balance between basically the balance between your initial investment and then what you're going to see on the other end. Because that's the balance that you need to be aware of in order to not get behind the eight ball before you even open. So, what would some of these things be? The lease itself, how much does the lease cost? The CapEx, how much do you have to improve the building to get it open? Your soft costs, like how much are you going to need to hire a whole team of architects and engineers, or can you kind of get through it without having to have a whole lot of professional support, more of like a lightweight, just somebody doing a couple drawings rather than a huge like stack of drawings for you? How much free rent are you getting? How much TI are you getting from the landlord to balance all of this out? What are your specialty investments, meaning the build out itself, like the contents of the building that you need to be working with? And all of these things sort of go into this side of the equation, and they all have to balance with the revenue that you're expecting on the other end. Because if it's too heavy in one direction, meaning really in this direction, you're just going to have a tough time getting out from under that as you go. And your debt burden is going to be very high right from the start. And that can be a tough place to be unless you're comfortable with that. So this is just a couple thoughts on really the early phases of development, because people do ask me this a lot about, hey, like break even numbers and this and that. And it really, the answer to almost all these questions is that it depends. It depends on your vision. It depends on the size of your facility that you're trying to do. It depends on how much you're planning to invest in the facility, how much you have to work on the building, how much you are getting from the landlord. Like there are so many different things. And that's why these are really sort of dials. I often think of them as dials that can go up and down depending on your situation, depending on the landlord situation. Some of them are happier to give money to you and take maybe more rent. Some of them want higher rent and will give you more money, or whatever the case is. Or maybe you're in a position where you have cash or you don't have cash. Whatever it is, it's always unique to you and the situation you're in with the landlord, with your business, and all these different things. And that's why this is the starting point. Once we get going in a project, that's when the chessboard, that's when the pieces start to move. And that's when we really start playing the game of developing a project from an idea all the way to open doors. And that's what developing a project really is. And that's why I always say, drawings are just a part of it, because we may never get to drawings, and you really shouldn't get to making drawings or design and some of that more fun stuff if the deal isn't a good deal for you, if the deal is going to put you in a bad place. Like, who cares what it looks like if it's like going to financially ruin you, and that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it's really not. It's more of a worst case scenario. So I hope this is helpful. And if you'd like to continue this conversation when you're ready to get your project going, please reach out to me. My contact info is below. Good luck with your project, and I'll talk to you soon.